In the middle of the wild savanna, a dying elephant collapses into the dust, abandoned by her own herd. Beside her, a woman kneels, her hands bloodied and trembling as she fights to save the unborn calf. When the baby finally emerges, shaking, glowing, unlike anything anyone's seen, the herd's fierce matriarch starts walking toward them. Everyone freezes. But what happened next shocked even those who thought they'd seen it all. First, let's go back to the beginning. The sun sank behind the acacia trees, casting long angular shadows that crawled across the cracked earth like silent witnesses. Maya's form, massive yet trembling, slumped against the dry basin as if the land itself had exiled her. The air was dense with the scent of dust and sweat, and each contraction forced a guttural sound from her throat that echoed into the emptiness, unanswered. Her flanks heaved, her eyes, clouded with exhaustion, searched the dusk not for help. She knew it wouldn't come, but for a shape, a sound, any sign that she wasn't dying alone. She had known loneliness her entire life, but never like this. Around her, the great plain continued breathing without pause. Birds cried overhead, hyenas cackled in the distance, and the herd, her herd, moved farther and farther toward the wetlands, hooves thudding in rhythm, unmoved by the fading figure behind them. None looked back. Not even Sasha, who had once sniffed Maya's newborn scent, but decided that something in her blood was wrong. Sasha's law was simple: the herd survives, or it dies. And those who couldn't carry their weight, literally or metaphorically, were left to the lions and gods. Maya's muscles locked in a spasm that made her tusks dig into the dirt. Her legs folded beneath her like a crumbling pillar, but she didn't cry out this time. Her pride, tattered though it was, had teeth. There was no dignity in begging, so she endured, alone, and every minute she remained breathing felt like defiance. 100 yards away, Emily's face was lit by the flicker of her dashboard light, but her thoughts were dark. She could see the outline of Maya's suffering through her binoculars, framed by dust and isolation. Her heart slammed against her ribs. Training and protocol said, "Observe, document, do not interfere." But her conscience had long since stopped listening to rules written far from this place, by people who had never heard a creature scream like that. "She's not going to make it," Emily muttered, her voice cracking. The wind pressed against the windows of the Land Rover like a whisper from the bush itself. "Do something." But her fingers trembled as they hovered above the ignition. Maya twitched again, once, then twice, then let out a low, broken trumpet that didn't echo. It was swallowed whole by silence. The night clung to the earth like grief, thick, unrelenting, and breathless. Beneath a sky sown with stars that offered no comfort, Emily knelt beside Maya, her arms and legs caked in mud, sweat, and blood that wasn't her own. Her flashlight, now dim and flickering, cast a sickly yellow glow over the elephant's collapsed body, illuminating the torn earth around them, a battlefield of struggle and silence. Maya's eyes had dulled, their once glassy surface now a dull bronze disk, barely following Emily's movement. Her great chest rose with terrifying slowness. Every exhale sounded like a plea wrapped in resignation. The contractions had grown erratic, sometimes hours apart, sometimes stacked like waves in a storm. She had fought beyond the limits of endurance, and now that fight was waning. Emily's hands, raw from friction, her knuckles split and swollen, gripped a length of lubricated cloth she'd fashioned from the lining of her own coat. Every time she shifted it slightly, Maya's body flinched, barely, but enough to show she was still tethered to life by some thin, burning thread. "You're not going to die out here." "Not like this," Emily whispered, teeth clenched, her voice low and full of fury. Not at Maya, not at nature, but at a world that made compassion a crime, that called this interference when it was survival. The wind picked up, blowing sand against her face like needles. Somewhere beyond the trees, a lion roared, a cruel reminder of how close death always prowled, but Emily didn't flinch. She poured the last of her canteen over Maya's cracked lips, leaned down, and pressed her forehead to the elephant's skin. "You've carried this life alone. Another push." Her muscles screamed. Something shifted. Viscera groaned and parted. Then a sudden release, like a boulder rolling free from a mountainside. A gush of fluid exploded out, soaking Emily to the bone. Then, nothing. No cries. No movement, until a tremor. Then a small trumpet, high, sharp, desperate. Emily spun. There, trembling, legs splayed, slick with amniotic fluid, was life. A calf. Breathing. Crying. Emily collapsed forward, unable to hold back the sob that rose from the pit of her chest. It was not victory. Not yet. But it was something so close it made her tremble. The sun was rising in fractured streaks, casting soft amber light across the fractured earth when the impossible stood before them. The newborn calf, still wet with the aftermath of its violent emergence, glistened in shades no eye expected. Its skin was not the ashen gray of its kind, but a pearlescent blue-gray that shimmered like riverstone under moonlight. Its ears, oversized, trembling, held delicate white tips, as if brushed by frost, and its eyes, wide, glassy, and painfully bright, held a stillness that did not belong to something so new. They weren't merely looking. They were seeing everything. Emily's breath caught. Her hands, smeared with drying blood, dropped to her sides. This wasn't just a birth. It was a revelation, a rupture in what was known. Her scientific mind reeled. Was this pigmentation? Albinism? But no, it was too specific, too intentional, as though nature had painted this creature with a trembling, deliberate hand. The calf, already attempting to rise, pressed its knees against the dirt, faltered, then stood, tall, awkward, glorious. Then came the rumble of feet, a warning, a reckoning. The herd had returned. Dust bloomed around them like smoke. Dozens of forms emerged in silence, their tusks catching morning light, their eyes fixed not on Emily, but on Maya, on what she had done. Sasha came first, her body immense, her face unreadable beneath the ridges of age and experience. She approached without urgency, her every step radiating weight, not just physical but symbolic. Her presence bore the gravity of tradition, of power held for decades. The herd parted behind her like a tide around stone. Emily held still. Her instincts screamed to intervene, to shield the calf if Sasha chose rejection, or worse. But her body refused to move. This wasn't her moment. It never had been. Sasha stood above the calf, motionless. The wind stilled. Even the birds held their breath. Then, with a grace born of generations, Sasha extended her trunk and laid it gently across the calf's head. She held it there, not as a threat, but as a benediction. The sound that followed was low, guttural, and impossibly deep. It rose through her feet, through the dust, through the silence. It was reverence. The herd responded. Soft rumbles bloomed like echoes. One by one, the elephants stepped forward. They touched Maya's side. They circled the calf, not as judges, but as witnesses to a miracle. Trunks dipped with water. Others tossed shade-casting branches onto the scorched earth. It was not just care. It was ritual. Maya, exhausted and blinking, lifted her head, not in fear, but in something like wonder. She had given them what they feared she never could, and now they could not look away. The rains had long since returned to Amboseli, and with them, the tall grass swayed in rhythmic pulses, hiding the scars of a night that had redefined everything. The soil was softer now, forgiving, unlike the memory etched into it, of labor, of solitude, of a body collapsed beneath the weight of both birth and rejection. But the land remembers, even when others forget. And so did Emily. She stood once more at the edge of the watering hole, boots sunken in mud, binoculars lowered, arms limp at her sides. Her eyes scanned the horizon, but they weren't searching. They were honoring. Years had passed, and with them the world had changed, if only slightly. The herd had grown larger, tighter, more fluid in its choreography. There was no longer hesitation when Maya entered their midst. There was reverence. They followed her not out of obligation, but out of choice, out of understanding. What Maya had endured was never spoken of by the herd. Elephants did not need language for memory. But it lived in the way they made space for her, in the way Sasha, whose steps had once broken ground without compromise, now moved deliberately behind her. Maya's gait was still uneven, her tusks still smaller. But she walked like one who had survived judgment and emerged not bitter, but radiant. Eli, now nearly full-grown, walked beside her like a sentinel carved from the very spirit of the land. His skin retained its strange, pale glow, the white tips of his ears flashing like banners of a quiet revolution. He was not feared, as many had predicted. He was trusted. Elders deferred to his instincts. Calves followed him without hesitation. Emily had watched him learn how to read storms, how to guide stragglers, how to wait when others rushed. His power was not in dominance, but in restraint. And yet, the world remembered Maya. They came with cameras, with notebooks, with whispered awe. "She's the one," they'd say, "the one who gave birth to him." But what they captured in lenses was never the full truth. They didn't see the night of blood and ash, the way Maya had once screamed into emptiness, unheard. They saw a myth. Emily remembered a miracle carved from pain. On that quiet morning, as the herd passed, Emily saw Maya pause. The elephant's head lifted slightly, her eyes scanning the familiar shape of the human standing alone. Their gazes locked. Two survivors, bound by something deeper than species or story. And then Maya turned, not away, but forward. She didn't need acknowledgement. She was acknowledgement. No longer the outcast. She was the axis, the memory, the proof. Unseen no more, unforgettable, forever.